Last week, we delved into the topic of how to have a conversation with your body for healing, and I gave you my top 10 tips for how to go about that. Now, for the most part, this approach gets used to address specific physical conditions or symptoms. However, there's another application I developed some years ago which can be a tremendous support to people who are about to undergo some physically impactful event or before any physical exertion. So I've used it primarily for clients pre-surgery to great effect. And even if you're not facing some kind of surgery, and hopefully you're not, this is a technique that you can use and apply in many other life situations. So in this episode, I want to share this pre-surgery body dialogue technique with you. I'm going to talk about the principles and why it's so powerful, give you a couple of case studies, and give you some ideas of how you can use it in your life beyond the realm of surgery. So stay with me and let's do this. Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. If you're looking to improve your life, to heal, to grow, and mature as an individual, but maybe you found that some of the personal development and consciousness stuff has given you the impression that you need to be super serious and vigilant to get anywhere meaningful, or feeling like maybe you're just not up to snuff, well, this show is here to remind you of your humanity, and in fact that's where your true joy and brilliance lies. With over 25 years of experience in the transformation biz and having developed MPA, one of the world's simplest, pressure-free approaches to growth and well-being, if I do say so myself, I'll be sharing tips, steps, and insights that'll help you navigate all the aspects of life as a growth-seeking being. On this show, it comes to you with a good dose of humour, maybe a smattering of colourful language, a reminder not to take things so personally, and most importantly, to be kind to yourself along the way. Make sure you hit that follow button, and let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. You can find the show notes for today's episode if you go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/104. That means there's 103 previous episodes to go and binge listen to if you haven't listened to them already. And if you're brand new, welcome to you. I love that you found me through this episode. I hope you enjoy this show. I'd love you. It would help support the show if you hit that subscribe or follow button, depending on which platform you're listening on. And leave me a comment, say hi, especially if you're watching on YouTube. This podcast goes out on all the major platforms, but also I always put one up on YouTube. That's a good place to comment. Or if you want to come and comment on the usual social media channels, especially for me, it's Instagram and Facebook. You can find me on Instagram at Joel Young MPA. Also, that's true for Twitter. And on Facebook, if you go to Facebook and put in MPA Rocks, it's November Papa Alpha Rocks, then you'll find our Facebook page, which was originally set up, if you're thinking that's a funny name for a Facebook page. They used to be called fan pages back in the day, and an actual fan set the page up, and it's kind of stuck with us for all this time. So that'd be fantastic. Just hit that subscribe button, and I'd be really happy. All right, so today's show, there's quite a lot to cover in today's show. It really is a follow-up to last week's episode 103. Again, you can find that if you go to www.beabrillianthuman.com. I think I garbled that. www.beabrillianthuman.com/103, where I talked about how to have a conversation with the body, which is hugely powerful, and I'm a real fan of it. And I did say in that episode that I'd be covering this particular topic, which is something that I found, probably about 6 to 8 years ago. I was doing it quite a bit with clients to help them pre-surgery to use a kind of a dialoguing technique. But it's kind of distinct from how you approach a general conversation with the body where you're sort of helping to resolve a particular physical issue. Now, one thing I do want to say up front, kind of offer a general disclaimer. Take responsibility if you're going to try this. There's no guarantees in terms of health and all that legal stuff. And the other thing that I've come across is that I'm using the term body dialogue or body dialogues. Now, I've been using that term for a long time because it makes sense, because that's what you're doing. You're having a dialogue with the body. However, it's come to my attention that there is someone who's called Janice Steiber-Rue. I hope that got that name right. who developed an actual technique called called body dialogue or body dialoguing. And as a creator of MPA, a modality myself, I totally understand that there's, or I'd like to credit where it's due. So I had a look into what she talks about. You can find her website at bodydialogues.com. She's, I think, came up with it in the 1970s. She's certainly been doing Alexander technique. And I watched a little video about it. So there are some differences in how we go about it. But there were some great things I thought she said that I'd bring to your attention. I will link that website in the show notes for today. So her approach is really about combining breath work and body work along with the dialoguing aspect, which is where my focus is. There's a couple of things that I really loved that she said that I want to share with you. One is that she's found in her years of practice with it is that in general, her clients, she's found that they tend to talk to their body like they were talked to as a child, which I find really interesting. And she kind of backs it up with this idea. She asks a question is, are you your body's best friend? And I love that. And I'm totally aligned with that. In fact, if you go back to last week's episode, I talk about being conversational, like you're talking to a mate. It's kind of how I approach it. In my own experience, I found that's way better than being preachy to your body or what's the word? Sort of where you offer punishment. My words are failing. Punitive, critical, all of those kind of things. Like a parent, if you're speaking like a cross parent to your body, that's just not helpful in my experience. And ultimately, she's speaking about it in terms of there being a relationship with the body. And again, with MPA, and by the way, I should say, if you're new, MPA stands for non-personal awareness. It's a simple way to stop taking things personally, to live a resistance-free life, let go of the yucky stuff, let in the yummy stuff. There's so much to it. And you can get hold of it, by the way, if you go to www.joelyoungmpa.com. You'll find there's a free sheet with the process on it. You can download it. But it's, as well as being the simple MPA process, really MPA and non-personal awareness is a philosophy, and one of its underpinning ideas is that it's a relational model. It looks at life and everything that we experience as how we shift our relationship between the aspects of ourselves, between us and other people, and in this case it's our relationship to our body or specific aspects of the body. So I love that there's a great synergy in there. However, I guess my point of all that verbiage is that this isn't really aligned with her specific technique of body dialogue, and I hope that she's okay that I use that term, and I'm using it linguistically because it makes sense, but I wanted to make that clear distinction. All right, so let's get into it. I said we've got a lot to cover. I'm going to start us off with talking about what I like to call the preparation principle. What is that? Let's find out. So the preparation principle. Well, the whole idea of this application of having a conversation with the body is in preparation for something that's about to happen or is coming soon to a body near you. And the thing about that is that, well, there's a number of things. Firstly, if you think about it, the body is kind of set up for preparation. How do we know that? Well, the thing I like to point to is, and I don't know if you know this, but do you know the function or the purpose of the taste buds? Yes, it gives you the pleasure of tasting. But more than that, what actually happens on a chemical and in terms of the communication within the body, the idea is that when you put things in your mouth, the taste buds, what they do is they start to assess what's coming into the alimentary canal, what's coming into the digestive system. And in that, they basically figure out what the different components are, and that gives information in advance to the stomach and the whole of the alimentary canal and the body at large, so they get time to prepare the best setup in the body for digestion and then converting it into energy and all that good stuff. So in a way, the body is hardwired or set up to have that principle of, if you prepare, then the body has the time and is aware of what's happening and can do the best job it possibly can. This is why many people in the nutrition area, and I've also heard this idea from various, gurus, Buddhist monks, that kind of thing, and they say something along the lines of, drink your food and chew your drink, which basically means, keep your food in your mouth for a good amount of time. Why? Because the longer it spends in your mouth and the more you break it down with your teeth, the more information the body can get about what the components are, and therefore the best approach by the time it hits the stomach. So this principle of sort of giving the body the heads up of what's about to happen is already in line with one of the body's fundamental mechanisms to begin with. So when it comes to, say, pre-surgery, or again, we're going to talk about, say, physical exertion of some kind, then I love the idea that you can do the taste bud job with this idea of having the dialogue and letting the body know what's going on. Because that way, and it's not just the alimentary canal or the digestive system, but the whole body can prepare itself and get on side with whatever's about to happen prior to the event. It just means everything is more in order rather than it being kind of an out of nowhere shock to the system. Now, you might say, well, your brain knows, so your body knows, but that's the difference between conscious awareness and it just sort of being ignored in the corner. You leave your body ignored in the corner and it wonders what's going on. So again, that's why when people talk about, drink your food and chew your drink, it's that bringing consciousness, the more conscious awareness to the process, seems to have a function of helping the body be able to take in and be aware of what's happening. And also, from my perspective, going back to the idea that, is your body your best friend, as Janice Stiebel-Roos said, and, and there being a relationship, I think it's just polite. It's polite to let your body know what's going on. And it's kind of an act of self-care or body care, if you like, to have these conversations prior to something which is going to have an impact on the body. And when it comes to surgery, that's a pretty major thing. Any kind of surgery is massively going to impact the body systems. So that's the idea for doing this with clients, because I was having people come to me in my practice in general who were facing surgery, and it was kind of born out of the idea that, what if we just prepared the system so that it could be as aligned as possible before they go into surgery. And what I found, and there's a couple of case studies I'm going to share with you today, but what I found was it was amazing how much smoother the recovery was, the success rate was, and how much more at peace the individual felt having gone through this process prior to going to something which is quite scary often for people, which is going into some kind of surgery. So that's a kind of preparation principle. The idea in essence is if you have, a good conversation with your body, your mind, if you like, and your body can come into alignment and get the best result out of what is often a difficult or challenging situation. So I wanted to go through kind of the nuts and bolts, the sort of cornerstones of working in this way, in this kind of preparatory way, using body, or my version of body dialogue. So I'm going to go through it, and it may seem a bit heady, but when it comes to the case studies, hopefully it will sort of help you map that to a sort of a real life situation. And I think it will help you if you go back and listen to 103, but it's not strictly necessary. You don't have to go pause and go back and listen, although you could if that's what you wanted to do. But really, it's not strictly necessary. So first up is to honour what I do cover in episode 103, which the first 3 steps of that are pretty important, and they're a general principle, I think, for any kind of dialogue with yourself of any kind. So I'll go over those very quickly again. So first one is to give it your focus. In other words, carve out some time for it, especially in the pre-surgery setting. And if you decide you're going to sort of give this a go with clients, for example, then you'll already be in a sort of session kind of situation. Number 2 is keep it simple. I'm a massive fan of keeping it simple, not sort of the word I tend to use when I'm teaching MPA practitioners on our MPA mastery program is, watch out for complexification. That's a made up word, but it gets the point across. Adding complexity where It has no purpose. A lot of people do that, either to be clever, although we don't tend to admit that, but it's true. To be clever, or just because someone said that you're supposed to do that thing there. Some dogmatic idea. So keep it simple. And the last of the first three sort of steps or tips that I gave in the last episode was to be conversational. I've talked about that. But again, if we go back to this principle of like being a friend rather than talking down to your body, imagine almost like you're having a cup of coffee with your body. I know that sounds mad, but and just having a chat. I mean, that's what you're doing in the preparatory phase, is chatting it through before the event actually happens. And ultimately sort of getting it on side or making it aware or working out what needs to happen. So within that sort of general principle, the other thing I want to talk to you about is to have a mindset of fluidity, of lightness. That conversational aspect is part of that. Because there is a need to be fluid, because all conversations ultimately are dynamic. Now, I know that there are techniques of hypnosis with the body, which I understand can work very well. And I guess arguably this is kind of a facet of that. But one of the things I love about it being a conversation rather than a sort of like a passive stroke, being a passive active relationship where the therapist is the active, the client is the passive. This allows space for there to be a dialogue. So anything that comes up from the body's perspective can be sort of worked through, handled with the general intentions and prayers that are there anyway. So keep it fluid, keep it light, keep it conversational. So one thing that I tended to do when I was running these sessions, and by the way, I said that in the past tense because it's been a while since I've done that. But if it is something that you're thinking, oh my God, I need this, just reach out. I do have my one-to-one practice. I tend to run it in a different way, but if it's something you're feeling called to, get in touch with me and let's talk about it, because it seems to be coming back into my life in some form. But what I would always do was first off have a conversation outside of the conversation with the body, have a conversation with the client, and part of that is to ask them what their fears are around what's happening, especially in surgery, what they want. What their prayers are, what their outcomes are, because it's important, I feel, to get a picture of the landscape of the client's perspective prior to working with the body. So once you've got that, then you can consider potentially some positive reframes. Now, what do I mean by that? Positive reframe means sometimes, especially with fears, there can be situations where you can help the client look at things in a different way that means that their system can digest it or has a different experience of it. There's an episode, and I should have written this down, but I didn't, but I will put this episode into the show notes. There's an episode that talks about, how we have translations. We all have different translations of things. And how the translations that we have, how we interpret things, affects our experience. So all a positive reframe is exploring how the body or the person can interpret the experience in a way which is supportive to healing rather than scary or like it's against them in some way. So that's one of the techniques that I'll often include is those sort of positive reframes. And again, at one point about that is it's always very important in my mind to get congruence with the client or congruence with the client's body. You can offer a really fantastic reframe, but if it's not gelling, if it's not truly congruent, then you're only actually adding in that complexity. You're trying to impose your idea. And again, this is like at the core of non-personal wellness. It's at the core of the MPA Mastery Practitioner Training Program. Drilling this into people is that, you have to allow yourself to drop any attachment you have to this fantastic reframe idea and work with the client to find what truly works for them. And often you'll find, for the most part, I offer to the clues in the client. The answer will come from them, and it's about embracing what truly works for them in their language. The other piece of the pie is to acknowledge the tricky bits. The tricky stuff is where there is fear, or is there scaredness, or there may be genuine challenges depending on the nature of the surgery. And you can't sort of brush them under the carpet or pretend they're not there. Again, this is about having a real conversation. So what I found is when you can acknowledge those and work with them and be understanding of the body's perspective during the dialogue, or help the client to be understanding of the body's perspective, so that you can reach that sort of that congruence and that agreement. Then to acknowledge those things, to confront them, to presence them, to check what is there for the client or the client's body in this case. And that way you're working in the wholeness of it and not just trying to ignore the tricky stuff. One thing I think that I want to put in here as well is that as the facilitator of this, and again, this is whether it's because there's two ways to do this. You can do this as in a sort of, you're working with a client, which is what I'm talking about in my experience of it. But also, obviously, it's something you can do with yourself. So when it comes to being a facilitator of it, I tend to see that part of my job in this, I mean, part of it is the preparation, but I tend to take on the role of reassurance. That isn't to impose false reassurance, but it's in a sense, the idea behind that is that if I can become an advocate for it's going to be okay, and how can we find where that's true for you? If there's a way, then that's my facilitator's role. Now, how does that work in terms of if you're facilitating yourself? Well, as the mind part of that conversation, you can go into it with that intention and just express that in the conversation you have with your body. It's like, well, I'm really wanting to be reassuring here. How can I help? How can I do that? Which is just again, go back to the idea of having a conversation with a friend. You might go into conversation with a friend saying, I really want to support you. I really want to help. Let's figure this stuff out, and then the act of listening and empathy and other things that I talked about in episode 103 can come into play in the context of this preparatory conversation. Next up is be real. I kind of talked about that already, but you have to be real. You have to sort of again, that sort of covers the idea of not trying to sort of fake it or pretend something that's happening that it's not. Being real with someone in a conversation means if you're smelling bullshit, you're going to call bullshit. You can do it in a kind way, but that's being real. And if you're sensing resistance, you can point to it and be kind about it. And help someone or someone's body, if that's the part of the conversation, the body has resistance, and work with it. But being real to me is that ability to acknowledge that tricky stuff, to acknowledge what's going on, and to take into consideration what comes from the client, or if you're facilitating yourself, what comes from the body that may not immediately sit with you. It encourages a dialogical approach. Another piece of the equation as you go into this is to get permissions. Now, I find permissions really super important, especially when you have these conversations with the body. Again, in a client situation, you've got permission to have these conversations with your client, but then there's the client's body. Again, I talked about this in the last episode about personification of imagining the body is like a person unto itself. It's important to get permission from the body to have this dialogue. Or if you there are suggestions or positive reframes, getting permission from the body, is it okay if we follow this path of inquiry? And the body can go, oh, I'm not sure. Then you can talk about it. Or it might go, yeah, I'm really down with this. Let's do it. But by setting permissions along the way, you're already building that sense of congruence and togetherness, which is so important as part of the process. And also, you want to check. That can sort of come before, but also it's worth checking afterwards. So you have a part of the dialogue where you agree to see things in a new way. I find it's really good to check back in with the body. So are you okay with that? It was like it's not so much permission, but it's after the fact getting agreement that yes, all of us in this dialogue are in agreement about this, and checking that the body feels okay with it. That's where being real and addressing the tricky stuff can come in, because sometimes especially if a client where their particular personality tends to be, I guess, what you'd say on the agreeable frame of things. Sometimes they say agreement, yes, I agree, more because they feel they ought to than they actually do. That's where being real and being willing to sort of go, I'm just checking because I'm not, to me, that didn't sound like a full agreement. So if there's something hanging out, you really please do let me know, because it serves nobody to do that. So in a way, you're giving the client often permission to disagree with you, or to fess up to there being still some other stuff that needs to be worked on before you can get full and congruent agreement into whatever path you lay out. Now, all that being said, that doesn't necessarily, and I can't, because of the nature of the diversity of what can happen in these conversations, any specifics about how to dialogue. If you've listened to last week's episode, there's a good framework in there for general sort of conversation with the body. But from my perspective, if I can offer you that, as long as you hold these intentions and consider it a conversation, if you have skills at conversation or helping people talk with each other, if you're facilitating the personality and the body, then you've got everything you need. That's what I mean by keeping it light, keeping it conversational, rather than having to think about fancy setups and all the rest of it. Yes, they can be useful if you carve out a space and do something with imagination. But if you can just say, hey, let's have a conversation, and then as the conversation unfolds, and how would you facilitate a conversation? Well, what do you have to say? Well, what do you have to say? What do you say to that? What's your response to that? Have you got any thoughts? What are your ideas about this? That's like it's just facilitating a dialogue. And that's the approach to take within this preparatory thing. So prior to surgery, the simplicity of it is, you get together with your client, you find out what their prayers are, what their intentions are. You can use those as guidelines, especially if they tell you what they're afraid of. You can then address that within the conversation. Have the conversation, make sure you get permissions, and then afterwards check within all parts that have been part of the conversation that it feels okay, you're in alignment, and then you can kind of wrap it up with some final agreement, just to sort of be supportive of each other through the process, and then you're kind of golden. So let me share a couple of case studies with you, because I hope they'll help illustrate sort of how this can work. These are in the realm of pre-surgery. After that, I'm going to talk a bit about how you can use it, in a non-surgery situation. There's all sorts of ways you can use this general approach with your body, and I'll talk about that after. But I want to give you these case studies. I'm not going to go like in depth to all the numbers and everything. I just want to give you an overview of what happened before, during, and after in each case, to give you a sense of how I approached it and how effective it was. So the first case study, I'm not going to use names, was a lady who was going in for some colon surgery. I can't remember the specifics of what the surgery was, but it was major surgery. And so in our conversations beforehand, it emerged that her main issue and concern, the thing that rose to the surface, there are a number of things, was she sort of had this fear, this in her mind was these pictures of the surgeon's hands touching her body on the inside. And to her, that felt like an invasion, like these alien hands were sort of coming into her body. And it was a very disturbing thought for her. And so when we worked with the conversation of the body, that was one of the key things that I wanted to look at in terms of those positive reframes. So again, it was conversational about how we could, how we could see that differently. And what emerged from that was that she had within herself a general belief in a higher power or God. And so during the conversation, we agreed with the body and with her that in this conversation it unfolded that it would be really helpful if she could imagine that the hands of the surgeon, rather than being this kind of alien invader, were guided by the hands of God. And so we created this visual of these golden hands, the hands of God coming into the hands of the surgeon. And what that meant was that she didn't feel like she was about to be invaded and violated, but that she was actually, what was happening was a tremendous amount of support, and that she was effectively in God's hands, which for her in her world worked really well to relax the body and relax herself. And also within that, another part that I found helpful in these sort of pre-surgery dialogues is an invitation to work with the drugs, because part of the process then was the anesthetic, of course, and then the sort of post-procedural drugs. So again, within the conversation, it was like, well, there's going to be some drugs coming in. They're not necessarily the most the most natural for the body to encounter. Nevertheless, their intention, their purpose is to support you in your healing, speaking to the body. So are you willing to work with that? How can you maybe support working with the drugs rather than treating them as an enemy? And that's a part of the conversation that I found recurred quite a lot in terms of helping the body go, okay, I get it, it's going to be okay, and it just helped the system prepare for what's coming. Now, the result of that was that she was back on her feet after that surgery in record time. Literally, she had the doctors coming in to ask what had happened, how come this was the case, this shouldn't be possible. They even made a case study of her to find out what was so successful about what she did before. They weren't very open to the fact that it had to do with the body dialogue session that we did. Nevertheless, they found their reasons. But it was a curiosity, because there was such an amazing sort of healing time, was super rapid. The recovery time was off the charts. And ultimately, she found before going into the surgery, she went from basically a state of terror to a state of calm relaxedness. And afterwards, she was a very happy bunny, and the surgery ultimately was a great success. So the second case study I want to share with you is not so much surgery. This is more of a very full-on treatment. Now, this client was young. She was like around 30 years old. She had a couple of young kids, a yoga teacher, but she had multiple sclerosis. Well, say that again. She had multiple sclerosis, MS, which is a hugely debilitating disease. And she'd found that there was a new kind of therapy where they effectively do an immune system reset. And this is a major thing. They use aggressive chemo, followed by stem cell therapy. And it has about, I looked this up on the internet just now, it's at about a 46% success rate, but there is a high risk of death during the whole process. So it's a very high risk. But she decided that she wanted to do this because the idea of the disease sort of progressing more and more in her situation, just in the balance of things, that was her choice to do it. And she'd heard about my approach, and so she came to me, and we worked to help her prepare her body for this very full-on treatment. I mean, really, it totally strips the body of its immune system, and then through the stem cell therapy, allows it to build up. I mean, resets it so it comes back without the condition of the MS, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. So in our sort of pre-conversation, and I was looking for what's the main fear, the main issue that's going on with the client. She had basically a fear of dying. Very reasonable. Again, acknowledging the tricky stuff. The numbers were in this brand new surgery at the time, which again was about, I guess, 5-6 years ago maybe, it was high risk, and so that was a very real fear. So it's not like you can brush that under the carpet. So the approach that we took really was to fully subscribe and enroll really the body support in the decision to go ahead with this, even though it had a massive impact on the body. From the body's perspective, it needed to, in a sense, be completely attacked in order for this process to work, in order for the procedure to work. So we worked with, first of all, enlisting the body with the idea of it. And that meant really talking to the body about why, to bring the awareness of the body to why are we choosing to do this, and can you support me? And so part of the conversation was talking about the kids and talking about a future life and how it was left as it was. So there was a very real and powerful conversation with the body until the body, and then we also focused on courage, I remember as well. It's like, let's together have the courage to go through this and work with it. So most of that was really enlisting the body support. And that in itself, in a way, offset the sort of the fear of dying. I mean, it wasn't something that we were either aiming for or could take away because it was a very, very real risk. It was more about, are we willing to take the risk? Obviously, in her mind, she'd made that decision, even though she was scared. But that was about bringing the body on board. Are you in? Can we be in this together? Because our best chance of survival is if we're together on this. That was the kind of general tone of the conversation. So by bringing the body on side, what happened? Again, this is a case study where it's very similar to the last one, as much as the undergoing of the procedure, which meant some considerable isolation as well, went very smoothly. It was still tough because that is, chemo to that degree is never going to be comfortable. Nevertheless, she described to me how it was easier than she thought it was going to be. Plus, the main thing here is that she found, again, that she got reports from the doctors that it was amazing how well she was able to receive the procedure. It didn't seem to be so stressful as they'd experienced with other people. And ultimately, we're now, 6 years on, and when I check out her Instagram, she's active in her yoga teaching, she's doing wild swimming, she's there holding her kids. This is something that obviously there's no proof for the impact of the body dialogue sessions, but I know in her mind, and she said to me directly, that she feels like that more than anything else gave her the ability to go through that with such success. So again, that's a bit different from the last one, as much as we were looking at, you could say, well, it's fear of dying. Can I get rid of the fear? It wasn't about that. This was one of those conversations where it was really about enlisting and enrolling the body into the idea of a decision that she had made, so that there was togetherness and unitedness over the kind of fear and conflict, which can only, well, generally I found gets in the way of the, of the whole, of the healing impact that is possible. All right. So I hope that's given you some insight into what's possible in terms of using this as a pre-surgery preparation. And obviously, I've already gone, over half an hour already. There's a lot to cover. So really my intention of sharing that is to inspire you as to what's possible, give you some ideas about how you can work with this idea of having a conversation with your body in a way which prepares you for things. But for most of us, surgery isn't what's happening in our lives. So in this last section, I want to talk about where else you can use this general principle. So as I said, anywhere where you're going to take your body into some kind of sort of physical exertion, it can definitely help. So the first and most obvious thing is, something like any kind of exercise, pre-exercise. This is especially true if you've got maybe some kind of back problem or some injury. Then doing a bit of prep work with your body before you go into the exercise session, as long as your stretches and all that wonderful stuff, is a really powerful thing, because again, what we're doing here is getting the body and mind aligned with what's about to happen. So whether you're going to the gym, doing a yoga session, or even running a marathon, having a quick conversation with your body before, hey, we're about to do this, let's get together on this and make agreements about how the body can work most in harmony with my mind and this idea of what I'm going to do. So that's one area you can do it. Any kind of physical exercise, again, especially if you've got some kind of injury, where it would really help to work with the body in that way. Some other ideas. Maybe it's simply you're about to go on a long drive. Now, a long drive has an impact on the body. It's especially long drive, depending on what you're used to. And again, in these ideas, I think I ought to say here that you can keep it very light and easy and quick. It doesn't have to be a big, in-depth, elicit the fears kind of thing. In this situation, that's more for the surgery kind of approach. But in these situations, my encouragement to you is literally just to check in with the body. Hey, body, about to run this marathon today. About to go on a 12-hour drive. Yeah, I understand that may be tricky on the back or whatever. Can we talk about this? I'd love to involve you in how we can best support that. Invite the conversation, just helps the body feel included. Again, it's polite. and it will, in my experience, support you wonderfully so that you don't you end up getting out of the car all stiff. You're more likely to get out and feel, I feel pretty good actually, because you've done the taste thing. You've given it the chance to prepare for what's about to happen. Maybe you're going out, out on the raz. A night on the town, you're going to be drinking, you're going to be dancing, that kind of stuff. I've done this before. I don't generally drink a lot, but on occasion, you go to a big party and you're going to drink more than you probably should. I have a conversation with my body. Hey, body, we've got this party coming up. I know it's not in our best interests to go on a bender, but I might do that. So can we kind of have a conversation? I found that I get less hangovers if I do that. My body feels better the next day because it's gone, fair enough. I guess, it's going to be fun. We can focus on the fun. And now that I know what's coming, I can prepare things and maximize the way my system will digest alcohol or whatever that thing is. So it's a great thing to do. And you'll probably get the theme of this is that the invitation here is to start including your body in what's going on in your life. It'll work with you better. I don't know, maybe you're moving house. Moving house is going to put a strain on the body. All those lifting boxes, that kind of thing. Hey, body, we've got this house move tomorrow. I'm going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting. Can we get together and talk about it? Can we, how can I help? What can I do to support you? The body might go, well, maybe you can do your bit and keep your back straight and bend your legs and don't lift, that kind of advice. Practical stuff might come out. But simply, again, by doing the taste bud thing, you're giving the body the heads up consciously and inclusively in a way that it can prep the body and sort of manage its systems to support you in the best possible way. And the last idea I've got for you is if you're changing a habit. So like changing a diet is something which is going to impact the body. So before you go into this sort of full-on dietary change, have a conversation with your body. Hey, body, this is one of those situations where you might, want to talk about the intentions and the whys, which I talked about with the MS patient. So, there's a reason that I'm choosing to do this, and the body's going to be like, I crave that stuff. I've got used to you dumping all that sugar in me. It's going to be tough. And you go, I know. And it might be a bit of a sudden curveball, but I think it's the best way to go about it. How can we get that on board? Have that conversation with the body means that the body is going to understand and support you as you make those changes, whatever they may be. So again, in those kind of situations, this is where you can lean into the being light about it. It is worth carving out a bit of time for some of those things. Maybe not the long drive, but certainly if you're doing a major dietary shift, or running a marathon, that's probably worth taking 5-10 minutes to just sit down and go, let's talk about this. But I've found in my life that those kind of inclusively or including the body in a conversation prior to those kind of things means that things tend to go a lot more smoothly. Well, that's a wrap for today. Hope you've enjoyed this show and these 2 shows about body dialogues. Do go and check out the show notes. I've laid things out there for you to sort of, especially the nuts and bolts section of it. You can find that at www.BABHS2Ep104 for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. I always appreciate it. It feels like a privilege that you put me in your ears once a week. And I hope to see you back next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this show, I'd love you to do me a solid and tell someone about it. They can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. Plus, if you visit the website, www.BABHS2Ep104.com, you can share the show notes to social media and make my day. Also, make sure you hit that follow button, and if you haven't yet downloaded the MPA process sheet, head on over to joelyoungmpa.com and get your free copy today. Big love, and see you next time.